This is our story, the story of our music. The music you had to listen to for a while in the late 80s if you really wanted to piss off everyone around you, even other metalheads. This is the story of thrash metal. Is this the first thrash song? Or maybe this? Perhaps this one? Could this be it? Or this one here? All of these songs certainly played a role in inspiring the genre, but they were more like special cases within albums that, while excellent in quality, were much calmer overall. The actual beginning of the style took place between 1980 and 1983. Initially, in late 1981, in the rather unusual setting of Newcastle, in northern England, a band called Venom released their debut album, Welcome to Hell. This debut was the spark that ignited the fire. This time it wasn't just a song, it was a whole damn album. And the song Witching Hour is, in my opinion, the first full thrash metal piece of music ever written. Venom was an unlikely combination of too many elements, kind of like the perfect storm, if you like. The punk attitude, their, well, rather limited musical abilities, the very poor production, and the band members' thirst to be faster, harder, wilder, heavier, and more blasphemous than their influences, namely Judas Priest, Black Sabbath, and Motorhead. All contributed to them sounding like no one before them. They influenced everyone. The American thrash scene, Slayer and Anthrax have repeatedly spoken about how important they were. The German thrash scene was likely even more influenced by them than its American counterpart. Then there was Sepultura, Bathory, early death metal, black metal, everyone. Venom was the main reason we formed the band, claims Tom Angel Ripper, who was a coal miner in the Ruhr Valley before creating Sodom, which he did immediately after hearing Venom. We couldn't believe how heavy a three-person band sounded. We made the decision to create music that would be heavier than Venom and faster than Metallica. That was our slogan. Of course, Venom themselves don't cover the entire range of sound that thrash would present. There is a significant influence from British and American hardcore punk in both the sound of the drums, as the frenetic drumming pace that would become the trademark of thrash was first used in this scene. But also in the content of the lyrics, much more political and socially conscious, miles away from the typical fantasy and gothic horror themes of traditional heavy metal. Too many thrashers will adopt this type of lyrics sooner or later, even if they didn't start out that way. The debut album of the band, Discharge, Hear Nothing, See Nothing, Say Nothing, and the sound of Anti-Nowhere League, Disorder, and The Exploited from the UK, as well as that of the Misfits, Black Flag, Suicidal Tendencies, and DRI from the United States, were all crucial to the emergence of thrash metal. The third ingredient that helped create the style was, of course, the technical virtuosity, heaviness, and speed of the new wave of British heavy metal. In bands like Iron Maiden, Diamond Head, Angel Witch, Raven, Tigers of Pan Tang, and above all, Judas Priest, who were considered the originators of the movement, but not exactly part of it. The unexpected success of the genre and the rise of all these bands had a profound impact on the entire underground metal scene, inspiring bands, mainly from the other side of the Atlantic, but also from places like Germany and Brazil, to try to imitate them and, of course, ultimately surpass them. These three ingredients, the new wave of British heavy metal, hardcore punk, and Venom's first two albums, developed roughly from 1980 to 1983. During this year, the stage was set for the emergence of this new musical genre, which would redefine the boundaries of both heavy metal and music in general in relation to heaviness, speed and sonic, or sometimes even physical violence. What was the first thrash band and the first thrash album? The prevailing view is that both of these distinctions go to Metallica, who were formed in Los Angeles in the early 80s, but eventually moved to San Francisco. Regarding the album, we can't say much. Metallica did indeed release their first album, Kill 'Em All, on July 25, 1983, 5 months before the next thrash release, Slayer's Show No Mercy. There's the case of the Canadian speed metal band Exciter, who released their debut, Heavy Metal Maniac, 40 days before Metallica, but their music was ultimately categorized as speed metal or heavy metal rather than thrash metal. Let me stop for a moment and say that for many, Kill 'Em All is also speed metal, so the first thrash album should be credited to Slayer. I disagree with that statement, as Kill 'Em All contains songs that aren't speed metal, such as Seek and Destroy, Four Horsemen, or Jump in the Fire. As for the first band that played thrash, things are more unclear here. Metallica was founded in 1980 and released 2 demos in 1982. After moving to San Francisco, they became part of the Bay Area scene, the birthplace of American thrash, from which several giants of the genre would later emerge. Leaders of the scene before Metallica arrived were a band called Exodus. They were founded in 1979, a year before Metallica, and had recorded a 3-song demo in 1982, just like Metallica, although their debut was finally released in 1985. On the east coast of the USA, Overkill from New Jersey were also formed in 1980 and wrote the song Death Rider in 1981, which they eventually released on their demo, Power in Black, in 1983. Also on the East Coast, Anthrax from New York had formed in 1980 and released their demo in the summer of 1982, but their debut came out 6 months after Metallica's. Since we don't know the exact release dates of the demos, we could say that Exodus is the first thrash band chronologically, although the first song should probably be credited to Overkill. At least the distinction for who named the genre must go to Anthrax, as English journalist Malcolm Dome used the term thrash to refer to their 1984 song, Metal Thrashing Mad. Anyway, the thrash scene started in 1983, and it caught on so quickly it was unbelievable, certainly aided by the tape trading scene and the camaraderie of the metal underground of the time. The bands inspired each other, but there was no animosity between them. They helped each other as if they were part of an underground brotherhood, regardless of where each of them came from. In just 2 years, from 1983 to 1985, we saw the formation and some form of official release from a huge number of new bands playing this exciting new music, thrash metal. If you weren't counting, we had 21 releases from 24 bands within a year and a half after Metallica's debut. Impressive, isn't it? The future will hold very different paths for all these bands. Some will disappear quickly, others will have huge careers. In the second half of 1985, we also had 3 very interesting albums: Speak English or Die by SOD, Dealing With It by DRI, and Animosity by Corrosion of Conformity. Although not strictly thrash, these albums would play a very important role in the evolution of the genre, as we will explain in the next chapter. The creative peak of the first wave of thrash metal came in the years 1986, 1987, when four seminal albums were released: Master of Puppets by Metallica, Peace Sells But Who's Buyin' by Megadeth, Among the Living by Anthrax, and Rain in Blood by Slayer. These albums are part of heavy metal history today. They consistently appear on various best-of lists and are generally considered the best albums by their respective bands, with a slight exception, as we'll see shortly. They also marked the commercial rise of thrash metal, as all have been certified at least gold in the US. An amazing feat considering how heavy they all are. The rise of thrash was greatly aided by the almost simultaneous emergence of glam or hair metal as the most commercially successful heavy metal subgenre worldwide. To the metalheads of the time, glam metal sounded light, bland, and silly, so many of them were immediately captivated by the much more serious, heavy, dark, and raw alternative that thrash metal was presenting. The exceptional quality and success of the four albums we saw at the beginning of the chapter helped christen the corresponding bands that created them as the so-called Big Four of American thrash metal, a title that still follows them today. During the same period in Germany, the bands that were leading that scene also released three very strong and successful albums, namely Pleasure to Kill by Creator, Persecution Mania by Sodom, and Eternal Devastation by Destruction. So in turn, they were called the Big Three of the German thrash scene, a moniker that also persists to this day. At the same time in the thrash underground, a new generation of bands emerged onto the scene. These bands are often referred to as the second wave of thrash metal, and some of them became very successful very quickly. In North America, we had and in Europe, as thrash gradually replaced other, more commercial forms of metal as the heaviest and darkest form of heavy music. Some of the genre's earliest fans began to feel that thrash itself had become too commercial, and new bands trying to sound heavier than the established thrash names began to emerge. The music these bands played, although derived from thrash, sounded so different that new terms had to be invented. In 1987, three subgenres emerged that pushed the boundaries of heaviness in music to new extremes. These three subgenres would form the basis for the overall extreme metal genre and would eventually replace thrash as the darkest and noisiest form of music available. But that hadn't happened yet. So in May 1987, we had the album Scream Bloody Gore by Death from Florida, which defined the death metal genre. Although Possessed's Seven Churches was later considered the first death metal album in terms of sound, at the time we still considered it a heavy thrash album. Death's album, as well as its successor, defined the clear dividing line between the two genres. That same month, a previously obscure band from Sweden, Bathory, released Under the Sign of the Black Mark, an album that had a very different sound from what they had accustomed us to. This sound had already been approached in the second Bathory album, as well as in the early releases of Hellhammer, Celtic Frost, but Bathory gave us the complete template that everyone would follow in the future. The new genre was named black metal in honor of Venom's second album. Finally, in July, in Birmingham, England, a band took the themes of heaviness and speed in music to their logical conclusion, releasing the album Scum and inventing the noisiest, harshest, and most extreme type of metal ever produced, which was named grindcore. The band's name was Napalm Death. And the origins of their sound could be found in the UK's hardcore and crust punk scene, but their music was quickly adopted by the metal underground. Glimpses of these new sounds had already taken shape in thrash, but 1987 was the year the road diverged, where the lines were drawn, where thrash ceased to be the heaviest music around. And that wasn't all. Inspired by the 3 albums I mentioned in the previous chapter, as well as the debut of Suicidal Tendencies, more and more hardcore punk bands began to incorporate thrash elements into their music, thus creating a new style. In 1986 and 87, many new albums were released that experimented with this genre mix, such as the most successful of all these albums was clearly Suicidal Tendencies' second album, Join the Army, whose music video for the track Possessed to Skate became a significant visual document of skate culture and was played regularly on MTV. The new subgenre also needed a name. This was taken from another landmark album, DRI's Crossover. Crossover thrash had been born. By 1988, thrash was at its peak. Despite the fact that the follow-up albums to the landmarks by the Big Four were considered somewhat disappointing, opinions have changed over time, and at least 2 of them are now considered the masterpieces they undoubtedly are. Nothing could stop thrash. Even more quality releases from new and ambitious bands were appearing almost every month. At the same time, many of the recognized thrash acts were releasing excellent albums such as In 1990, 2 of the Big Four released albums, perhaps as significant as those from 1986, namely Slayer's Seasons in the Abyss and what is often referred to as the best thrash release of all time, Megadeth's Rust in Peace. There was also room for development in the genre's sound. Some bands began to exhibit a drier, simpler, and more groovy thrash sound, such as Pantera with Cowboys from Hell, Exhorder with Slaughter in the Vatican, and Prong with Beg to Differ, while others mixed funk and alternative elements into the classic thrash sound, such as Suicidal Tendencies with Lights Camera Revolution and Mordred with Fool's Game. At that time, all of this was considered either a welcome change to the usual thrash palette or a natural evolution and renewal of the genre. Anyway, all these albums sold well. The bands often went on successful world tours, and their videos were constantly played on Headbangers Ball or even in regular rotation on MTV. We often read articles about thrash bands in the biggest rock magazines of the time, alongside more mainstream hard rock and heavy metal artists, while band members gave interviews on television and radio stations all over the world. We can confidently say that 1990 was an excellent year for thrash, the best in its short existence so far. The genre was recognized as a valid musical style by both fans and critics, much more appreciated than the overblown, overly mannered glam metal by everyone in the music industry. Then, from September 1990 to July 1991, thrash metal reached its absolute commercial peak with the Clash of the Titans tour, which initially included 2 of the Big Four, Slayer and Megadeth, along with Testament and Suicidal Tendencies, for 18 concerts in Europe. The tour then continued in North America with Anthrax replacing Testament and Alice in Chains replacing Suicidal Tendencies. With the presence of three of the Big Four, the tour was a huge success. The bands played in medium-sized arenas, demonstrating how much the genre had progressed since the days of tiny clubs that could barely hold 150 to 200 people. 5 weeks after the tour concluded, Metallica released their eagerly awaited new album. This would be the first in a series of releases that, perhaps without anyone expecting it, would change the fate of thrash and lead to its sudden fall from the peak it had just reached. On August 12, 1991, Metallica released their fifth LP. And to say that it caused multiple shocks to thrash fans worldwide is certainly the biggest understatement in its history. First of all, it wasn't thrash. Not at all. The songs were heavy, but also slow and simple. Secondly, it included two ballads, the second of which had no heavy parts at all. Thirdly, they performed the album's first single at the MTV Awards, on the same show as artists like Paula Abdul, Mariah Carey, and LL Cool J. By today's standards, of course, all these events seem normal. But I don't think music fans today can understand the cultural significance they had for thrash fans around the world, which will be better explained at the end of the video. Then, on September 24th, 1991, Nirvana released Nevermind, officially ushering in the rather short reign of grunge as the #1 heavy rock genre worldwide. In my opinion, which I've already expressed in the corresponding video, the rise of grunge didn't affect the fate of thrash to the extent people think, nor did it lead to its decline. Many fans of the genre who welcomed heavier grunge bands like Alice in Chains and Soundgarden never considered these bands as replacements for their favorite thrash groups. It was another album of the era that played a much more significant role in what came after. On February 25, 1992, Pantera released Vulgar Display of Power, giving us a new and fresh sound that you couldn't exactly call thrash. It was heavier, slower, darker, drier, simpler, and included down-tuned guitars, syncopated rhythms, and more aggressive vocals. Both the Metallica album, obviously, and the Pantera album were incredibly successful. Metallica became the biggest rock band in the world, and Pantera the hottest new name in metal. As a result, 90% of the thrash bands of the era began to copy these two albums. It was incredible. It was as if all the thrash bands had secretly agreed to slow down, become simpler, and change their sound, which was practically evident in almost all of their releases between 1992 and 1994, where bands were either trying to imitate Metallica, trying to imitate Pantera, or fit somewhere in between the two. Check out the albums, and if you don't believe me, just listen to them. The quality of these releases was varied. Some of them were truly outstanding. As for success, there were three clear winners: Megadeth, Anthrax, and Sepultura, who achieved the greatest success of their careers. The other albums didn't perform as well commercially and never reached the heights of their predecessors. Now, I can't tell you exactly why all these bands decided to play the way they did in such a synchronized manner. Maybe they genuinely liked the new style. Maybe the record labels put them under pressure. Maybe they simply evolved as musicians and as people. Honestly, I don't know. The result was that by the end of 1993, the not-so-long-ago great thrash scene had almost disappeared. And the reason wasn't Nirvana. It was that nobody was playing thrash anymore. Only DRI, Sodom, and Tankard had remained true to the sound. But that wasn't enough to keep the scene alive. Slayer, of course, was still around. But their new album, faithful to their classic sound, came too late, in 1994. Nevertheless, it seems that fans still loved heavy and aggressive music, and abandoned thrash precisely because they couldn't find that kind of music in the scene anymore. The proof? Just as thrash was declining, extreme metal was entering its golden age. From industrial metal with breakthrough releases by Ministry, Fear Factory, and Nine Inch Nails, to death metal with some of the genre's best albums coming out between 1991 and 1994, to black metal with the rise of the infamous Norwegian scene, to the creation of new styles like brutal death metal, death grind, and progressive death metal. The extreme metal scene literally exploded during those 3 years. And who were the people listening to all these bands and buying their records? Where did these new scenes find a ready, critical mass of fans? Yes, they had a loyal audience from the start, but that wasn't enough to become so big. It's not unreasonable to think that the thousands of fans who helped them gain recognition were disappointed thrashers. The rest of the story is well known. For 10 years, thrash was almost absent from metal's timeline. Helped along by the fully successful metalcore scene, which drew heavily from both traditional and crossover thrash as key influences. Around the mid-2000s, the big comeback began. Old school bands gradually started returning, playing shows and releasing albums, while a series of new names, inspired by the old scene, emerged and gained recognition, to the point that they were dubbed the new wave of old school thrash metal. All's well that ends well, then. It was clear to all of us who lived through that era that from the very beginning, thrash metal was not just a simple musical genre. It was something more. Much of what I'm about to say is excellently presented in the documentary Murder in the Front Row, which highlights the Bay Area scene and focuses mainly on Metallica and Exodus. It's available for free on YouTube, and I highly recommend watching it if you haven't already. From its inception, thrash metal emerged as a genre that saw itself both as a pioneer and a continuation of the old, traditional, highly respected heavy metal of the 70s. The huge difference that existed between thrash and the then popular forms of metal, their ballads, big hair, colorful clothes, massive shows, hedonistic lyrics, and flashy lifestyles, was clear from the start. The whole mindset was return to basics. Return to the original spirit of heavy metal. Beyond the music, the first clear area of differentiation was in the song lyrics. While successful heavy metal bands sang about parties, girls, drugs, and getting wasted, using simple innuendos and expressions, thrash dealt with society, political disillusionment, corruption, injustice, alienation, addiction, suicide, pessimism about the future, impending nuclear annihilation, the psychology of criminals, and so on. The difference was also striking in fan behavior at concerts. While glam metal fans went to see and experience a party, simply watching and applauding, thrash fans lived the show much more intensely, often engaging in physical violence with mosh pits and walls of death. At the same time, whereas in hair metal, with its huge shows and large stages, the distance between artist and fan was clear. In thrash, that distance simply didn't exist, as the musicians often became part of the crowd. Even the way musicians and fans dressed was different. On one side, there were leggings, colorful jackets, salon hairstyles, and makeup. On the other, a simple t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers. American sociologist Dina Weinstein points out obvious parallels between the relationship of thrash metal to mainstream metal and that of Protestantism to Catholicism in Christianity, as both movements challenged the establishment, which they viewed as corrupt, and advocated a return to the essential message free of excess and abuse. Finally, thrash paved the way for the further stylistic approach of the scene towards what we call extreme. Almost from the very beginning of the genre, there was a strong tendency for bands to push things a little further. This led, as we saw, to the creation of many new subgenres, which then achieved huge success. The extreme always attracts, especially the disillusioned youth of each era. Here in Greece, we experienced this just like in every other country. Although almost all of us started out listening to traditional metal, it became clear that once we heard thrash, that was all that mattered to us. The rest stopped being of any interest. It's not that we hated them, we just didn't pay attention. The true thrash fan listened only to thrash, bought only thrash, and hung out only with other thrash fans. From this perspective, the genre's entry into the mainstream in the late 80s and early 90s was a huge shock for all of us. It was as if everything around us collapsed, especially with Metallica, who, it should be noted, we considered our band, at least until the Black Album. The massive success and mainstream breakthrough of some bands brought on the surface habits that they had previously scorned and criticized, while the final blow was the musical flattening with a series of albums that tried to copy Metallica or Pantera. It was extremely disappointing to buy one record after another and realize that they all sounded the same, that they all had abandoned the original sound. So it wasn't surprising that a large portion of thrash fans turned to even more extreme forms of metal and the scenes they believed were keeping the spirit of the original thrash scene alive.
There's a king of 50 million jets and must take the train, steal a find a bomb.